The first thing I noticed was the bruise on my son's wrist. It wasn't the size that scared me. It was the shape. 5 small, dark marks curved around his wrist like fingertips. I looked at my 7-year-old son, Noah, and asked, "Who did this?" He stared at the floor. Then my mother sighed from across the kitchen table and said the words that changed everything. "Kids bruise. Don't make this about you again." I remember looking at her and thinking, again? This wasn't about me. It was about my child. And what I didn't know yet was that my parents had already decided whose side they were going to take. Welcome back to Karma Stories Hub. Today's story is about family, betrayal, manipulation, and the moment karma finally catches up with people who thought they'd never face consequences. If you enjoy satisfying revenge and emotional justice stories, you're in the right place. Grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's get into today's story. My name is Emily Carter, and at the time this happened, I was 34 years old, living in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, with my 7-year-old son, Noah. It was just the two of us. His father, Mark, and I had divorced when Noah was 4. It wasn't an ugly divorce. There were no screaming matches or dramatic courtroom battles. Mark simply wasn't ready to be a father. Eventually, he moved to another state, remarried, and became one of those people who occasionally sent a birthday card and believed that counted as parenting. So Noah and I built our own little life. He loved dinosaurs, grilled cheese sandwiches, and sleeping with every stuffed animal he owned piled around his head. He was sensitive, curious, and incredibly observant. And he had one habit that always made me smile. Whenever he was worried, he would rub the edge of his shirt between his fingers. That little habit became important later. Because on the afternoon I noticed the bruise, Noah was doing exactly that. I had picked him up from school on a Thursday. Usually, he came running toward me with some story about recess or a new drawing he'd made. That day, he walked slowly. "Hey, buddy," I said. "Everything okay?" He nodded. Too quickly. I crouched beside him. "You sure?" Another nod. Then he grabbed my hand. We walked to the car. I didn't push him. I had learned that sometimes Noah needed time before he could tell me something. That evening, I took him to my parents' house for dinner. My parents, Linda and Richard, lived about 20 minutes away. They had always been heavily involved in Noah's life. My mother picked him up from school twice a week. My father took him fishing on Saturdays. At least, that's how things had been until a few months earlier. I'd started noticing small changes. Noah became quiet after visiting them. He stopped asking to sleep over. When my mother mentioned picking him up, he'd say, "Do I have to?" The first few times, I assumed he was just tired. Kids go through phases. I didn't want to become the paranoid mother who saw danger in every uncomfortable moment. Then there was the bruise. At dinner, Noah reached across the table for his water. His sleeve pulled back. I saw the marks. I grabbed his wrist gently. "Where did you get these?" Noah froze. My father looked up. My mother didn't even turn around. "Emily," she said, "don't start." I stared at her. "Don't start what?" She finally looked at me. Making everything into some huge issue. I looked back at Noah. "Buddy, did someone hurt you?" He opened his mouth. My mother interrupted. "He probably bumped into something at school." "No," I said. "I asked him." My mother rolled her eyes. "Kids bruise." Then she said it. "Don't make this about you again." The room went completely silent. I felt something inside me go cold. "About me?" My father finally spoke. "Your mother just means you're overreacting." I looked at both of them. Then at Noah. "Where did you get the bruises?" He whispered, "I don't know." That answer scared me more than anything. On the drive home, I didn't say much. Noah sat in the back seat staring out the window. Halfway home, I asked, Do you want to tell me something? No. Okay. A few seconds passed. Then he said, Grandma said I shouldn't make you mad. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. What does that mean? I don't know. I wanted to pull over. Instead, I took a breath. Did Grandma say anything else? Noah rubbed his shirt between his fingers. She said grown-ups get tired of problems. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying every strange moment from the past few months. The sudden rules about what Noah could tell me. The way my mother started insisting he stay at their house longer. The way my father had become strangely defensive whenever I asked questions. And one other thing. 3 weeks earlier, my mother had asked me to sign a school emergency contact form. I had refused because the form gave her permission to make certain decisions without contacting me first. She'd been furious. You don't trust us, she'd said. I'd answered, I trust you to love him. I don't know if I trust you to make decisions for him without me. She hadn't spoken to me for 3 days afterward. Now I wondered if that argument had been the beginning of something. The next morning, I called Noah's pediatrician. The doctor examined the bruises and asked me questions. Were there other injuries? Was Noah behaving differently? Had there been any changes at home? I answered honestly. Then she asked Noah directly. Can you tell me how you got these? He looked at me. Then at the doctor. I don't remember. The doctor didn't accuse anyone. She simply documented everything. That mattered. Because later, documentation became the thing my parents couldn't argue with. That weekend, my mother called. I think you're being ridiculous, she said. I didn't respond. She continued. You're turning Noah against us. No. Then why won't he come over? Because he's uncomfortable. He is 7. He doesn't make those decisions. I felt my stomach tighten. Actually, Mom, he does get a voice in where he feels safe. She laughed bitterly. You're doing this again. Doing what? Destroying your family because you think everyone is against you. That sentence bothered me. Not because it was true. Because it sounded rehearsed. Like she'd used it before. I asked, who have you been talking to? Silence. Then she hung up. That evening, Noah came to me holding a small toy dinosaur. Mom? Yeah? Can I tell you something if you promise not to get mad? My heart sank. I promise. He sat beside me. Grandpa said I shouldn't tell you about the closet. What closet? The garage closet. I felt my entire body go still. What happened in the garage? I got locked in there. I stared at him. For how long? He shrugged. I don't know. Why? He started crying. Because I spilled Grandpa's paint. I pulled him into my arms. Who locked you in? He whispered, Grandpa. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just held him. Then I asked the most important question I could think of. Did Grandma know? Noah nodded. She told Grandpa to let me out before you came. Everything suddenly made sense. The bruises. The fear. The strange comments. The insistence that Noah shouldn't talk. My parents hadn't simply dismissed an accident. They had been covering something up. The next morning, I took Noah to school and contacted a child protection professional for guidance. I didn't confront my parents. That was difficult. Every part of me wanted to drive to their house and demand answers. But I knew this wasn't about satisfying my anger. It was about protecting my son. I also contacted the pediatrician again. She recommended that I document everything Noah told me in his own words and avoid leading questions. So I did. I wrote down dates. Statements. Changes in behavior. Everything. Then something unexpected happened. Noah's teacher called me. She said she'd noticed that he had become unusually quiet. He used to love group activities, she told me. Lately, he asks to sit alone. I asked if he'd said anything. She hesitated. Then said, he told me he doesn't want to disappoint Grandpa. My stomach dropped. That was when I realized this wasn't one isolated incident. Something had been happening for a while. And my parents had been teaching my son to hide it. A few days later, my father called. His voice was calm. Too calm. We need to talk. About what? About Noah. I said nothing. He continued. Your mother and I think you need help. I almost laughed. Help with what? Your suspicion. My suspicion? You're seeing abuse where there isn't any. I asked, did you lock Noah in the garage? Silence. Then my father said, that's not what happened. It was the first time he'd admitted something had happened. I asked, then what happened? He was misbehaving. He was 7. He needed discipline. I closed my eyes. You locked a 7-year-old in a garage? It was for a few minutes. How many? I don't know. Was Mom there? Another pause. Emily, you're twisting this. No. I'm asking questions. He became angry. You've always been difficult. I said quietly, don't call me again unless you're prepared to tell the truth. Then I hung up. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. 2 days later, my mother showed up at my house. She stood on my porch holding a folder. I want you to read this. I didn't take it. What is it? Evidence. Of what? That you're unstable. I stared at her. She handed me the folder anyway. Inside were printed messages between me and her. Some were harmless. Others were screenshots of conversations where I'd expressed frustration about work, money, and parenting. She had highlighted certain sentences. You've been collecting these? I'm protecting Noah. No. You're building a case against me. She shook her head. You're obsessed. I looked at the folder. Then back at her. You've been preparing this. She smiled. Because I knew you'd do this. That was when I understood. My parents weren't reacting to my concerns. They had anticipated them. They had been building their own story. A story where I was the unstable mother. A story where they were the concerned grandparents. And Noah? He was the child caught between them. My mother took one step closer. If you keep this up, you could lose custody. The words hit me hard. But I didn't let her see it. Get off my property. She stared at me. You'll regret this. No, I said. I regret trusting you. She walked away. That night, I checked every piece of evidence I had. And that's when I found the first real clue. A photo. My mother had accidentally sent it to me months earlier. It showed Noah sitting at their kitchen table. At first, I hadn't noticed anything. Now I zoomed in. On the refrigerator behind him was a calendar. There were handwritten notes beside several dates. Emily pickup. No sleepover. Don't tell Emily. My heart started pounding. I didn't know what the third note meant. But it proved my mother had been deliberately tracking what Noah could and couldn't tell me. Then I noticed another note. Doctor appointment, cancel? I froze. I checked my phone. 6 weeks earlier, Noah had supposedly had a stomach bug. My mother had told me she'd cancelled his pediatrician appointment because he wasn't feeling well. I had believed her. Now I wondered why the appointment had been scheduled in the first place. I called the doctor's office. They couldn't give me information without proper authorization, but they confirmed something important. The appointment had been requested because someone had reported that Noah was frequently complaining of pain. I had never made that report. My mother had. But she'd never told me. That was the moment the entire story changed. My mother hadn't been hiding what happened to Noah because she didn't think it was serious. She had been trying to control the information. And I still didn't know why. Then, 3 days later, I found out. A family friend called me. Her name was Susan. She had known my parents for years. "I don't know if I should be telling you this," she said. "Please." She took a breath. "Your mother asked me if I knew anyone who could help with guardianship paperwork." My blood ran cold. "Guardianship?" "She said she was worried about you." I asked, "What exactly did she say?" Susan hesitated. "She said you were overwhelmed. That you weren't stable. That Noah might be better off with them." I felt like the floor had disappeared. My parents weren't just covering up what happened. They were positioning themselves to take control of my son. Suddenly, the emergency contact form made sense. The documentation. The screenshots. The stories about me. The secret doctor's appointment. The notes. They weren't random. They were pieces of a plan. My mother had been creating a paper trail that made me look irresponsible while making herself look like the dependable grandmother. And then came the twist I never saw coming. Susan told me something else. "Your father didn't want to do it." "What?" "He told your mother this had gone too far." "When?" "About 2 weeks ago." I couldn't breathe. "So why didn't he stop her?" Susan's voice became quieter. "Because your mother told him she'd already spoken to a lawyer." I sat down. My father knew. He had known. But there was more. Susan said my father had given her something to pass to me if she ever thought I was in danger of losing Noah. A small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Emily. I should have protected you sooner. I didn't. I told myself your mother was just worried. I told myself the discipline was harmless. I told myself the paperwork was only a precaution. I was wrong. I also know she has been exaggerating things you've said and collecting them for a custody argument. I'm sorry. But I need you to know one more thing. There are cameras in the garage." I stared at the words. Cameras. My first thought was horror. My second was relief. Because if the camera still existed, the truth might not depend on anyone believing a 7-year-old child. I contacted the appropriate authorities and provided everything I had. My father eventually turned over the footage. And there it was. Noah had spilled paint. My father had become angry. He had taken him into the garage. The door closed. The footage showed Noah sitting alone for several minutes. Nothing graphic happened. But the important part was what came afterward. My mother entered. She saw Noah crying. Instead of helping him, she looked directly toward the camera. Then she said, "If Emily asks, he fell outside." I watched that sentence twice. Then again. The truth was finally there. Not my interpretation. Not my suspicion. Not my mother's accusation. The truth. The consequences came slowly. There was no dramatic courtroom scene. No judge pounding a gavel. No instant revenge. Instead, there were interviews. Investigations. Documentation. Meetings. My parents' access to Noah was restricted while everything was reviewed. My mother denied almost everything. My father admitted enough to make the situation impossible to ignore. The screenshots she had collected against me were reviewed in context. Most of them were normal messages from an exhausted single mother. One of the messages she had highlighted said, "Sometimes I feel like I can't do everything alone." My mother had presented it as proof that I couldn't parent. But when shown the full conversation, it was obvious what it really was. A mother asking her own mother for emotional support. The plan she'd built around me began falling apart. And then my mother made one final mistake. She contacted Susan. She didn't know Susan had saved the conversation. My mother wrote that she needed Susan to stick to the original story. That sentence became part of the evidence. Everything she had tried to control suddenly worked against her. My father eventually apologized to me. Not once. Many times. But I wasn't ready to forgive him. I told him, "You don't get to ask me to make you feel better about what you allowed." He nodded. I know. That was the first honest thing he'd said in months. As for my mother, she tried one last time to speak to me. She stood outside my house. I stayed behind the locked door. She said, "I'm still your mother." I answered, "And I'm still Noah's mother." She started crying. I was trying to protect him. "No," I said. "You were trying to control him." She said nothing. Then I added, "You taught my son that telling me the truth would get him in trouble. You made him afraid of disappointing adults. You turned his fear into evidence against me." My voice shook. "But you made one mistake." She looked at me. "You forgot that eventually, the truth doesn't need permission." I closed the door. And for the first time in months, I felt peaceful. Not happy. Not triumphant. Just peaceful. Noah began seeing a counselor who specialized in children. We started rebuilding our routines. Movie nights. Pancakes on Saturday mornings. Walks after dinner. Small things. Normal things. The things I'd once taken for granted. One evening, months later, Noah asked me a question. "Mom?" "Yeah? Am I allowed to tell you when I'm scared?" I pulled him close. "Always. What if someone says I'm not supposed to?" I looked at him. "You can always tell me." He nodded. Then he went back to building a dinosaur out of blocks. I sat there watching him. And I realized something. For months, I had thought karma meant my parents would lose something. Their reputation. Their relationship with me. Their access to Noah. Their control. But eventually I understood that karma wasn't really about punishment. It was about consequences. My parents made choices. Those choices created consequences. They wanted control. They lost trust. They wanted to make me look unreliable. Their own evidence exposed their manipulation. They wanted Noah to be afraid of telling the truth. Instead, he learned that his voice mattered. And me? I learned something too. Being a good daughter doesn't mean being a silent daughter. Being respectful doesn't mean ignoring your instincts. And protecting your child doesn't mean waiting until everyone agrees that something is wrong. Sometimes, you have to listen to the quiet things. The hesitation. The sudden silence. The change in behavior. The sentence that doesn't quite make sense. Because children don't always know how to explain what is happening to them. Sometimes all they can do is show you. Noah never became the same carefree kid he had been before. But he became something else. He became honest. Braver. More willing to speak. And slowly, the shirt-rubbing habit disappeared. That might sound like a tiny thing. To me, it was everything. My father eventually started rebuilding a relationship with Noah under clear boundaries. He apologized without making excuses. He never demanded forgiveness. He understood that trust had to be earned one day at a time. My mother never got the relationship with Noah she had imagined. And she never got the control over him she'd been trying to create. But I didn't celebrate that. I didn't need to. My son was safe. That was enough. I still think about the night my mother looked at those bruises and said, "Kids bruise. Don't make this about you again." She thought she was dismissing me. She thought she was ending the conversation. Instead, those words became the reason I started asking questions. And sometimes, the sentence someone uses to silence you becomes the very sentence that makes you refuse to stay silent. If there's one thing that I learned from everything that happened, it's this. When someone tells you that you're overreacting, don't automatically believe them. You don't have to accuse everyone. You don't have to assume the worst. But you do have to listen when something feels wrong. Especially when your child is trying, in the only way they know how, to tell you something. I chose my son's safety over my parents' approval. And I would make that choice again every single time. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted your parents immediately, or would you have quietly gathered evidence first? If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another karma story.